Hello, and welcome to the Building an Indie Business Podcast with SupremeRumHam. I'm your host, Alex Edmonds. Today, I want to discuss the launch of the Open Podcast newsletter. I want to discuss what is the current form of the newsletter, how I promoted the newsletter, the future of the newsletter, and what inspired me in the current design of the newsletter. Okay, so let's get into it. I sent the very first newsletter on January 8th. The name of the newsletter is The Sound Wave, and I named it The Sound Wave because the San Francisco music movement in the 1960s was called the San Francisco Sound Wave, and I listened to a lot of these bands such as Fleetwood Mac, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane. So in honor of the San Francisco Sound Wave, I named the podcast The Sound Wave. Okay, and the current form of the newsletter is I send it out once a week on Wednesday, once a week for now, and it's 3 links from the podcast industry in the past week since I created the newsletter, and it's one highlight of a member in the podcast or in the open podcast community. So it's either a new member of the open podcast community that has a podcast, or it's a member of the community that had a new episode. So the January 8th episode, it contained a link to an announcement on Twitter from the company Substack, and they announced that they will be getting into podcast hosting. So if you are starting a podcast and need a host, you can check out Substack. The next link was a link that showed you how to add donations to your show notes, and this is because podcast players such as Overcast, they have a button that their listeners can press, and it'll link them to a donation page for the podcast that they're listening to. The final link was a link to a blog post from the host of Darknet Diaries talking about how they grew the podcast in 2019 and what they did, and more details. And I highlighted Fajar and Mango Minutes, and then I wrote a short description of the episode that was most recent for his podcast. And I only did 3 links because I want to keep it short so that people don't get overwhelmed by the amount of content that is in the email list, and then, or in the newsletter, not the email list. And then at the end of everything, I added a link to the community and a link to the list. Short and simple. How I promoted the newsletter is I tweeted it out. And the reason I tweeted it out, because the people that follow the Open Podcast Twitter account and the Telegram account, people in the Twitter and the Telegram are different people, and I want new people to see the newsletter, not the core members of the open podcast community. So I want to bring people on Twitter to the newsletter. Okay, and why I want to do that is because an email list is more inclusive than Telegram. And so this is because for the email list, all they need is an email to sign up for it. And if they want to join the Telegram chat, they have to create a Telegram account. So the email list is less steps to join the community. Yeah. So the email, or like the setup of the newsletter, it was inspired by Nirael and his newsletter, and it's very similar looking to the open podcast newsletter. I also want, or the future, okay, now I'm going to talk about the future of the newsletter. So, the very first thing I need to do to improve the newsletter is promote it more and promote it better. I need to find places to post the newsletter, and this is because the purpose of the newsletter is to bring in people to the community, and if I don't promote it better, then people won't come to the community, which the more people in the open podcast community, the better. Okay. The way I designed the newsletter, well, why I used Nirael's design, is because I want to be able to insert ads into the newsletter, or links to sponsored content. And so by having it simply be links and descriptions, I could very easily insert a sponsored post into the newsletter. So I would like to have someone sponsor the newsletter. So I have to find out where to go to find a sponsor for the newsletter. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a design. I want to add color to it and add like different different fonts and colors to the fonts. Because right now the newsletter is just links and basic fonts. Okay. So the next thing I want to add to the newsletter in the future is I want to make it funny in some way. I want to figure out how I could add jokes or something. So yeah, there's that one. And then finally, what I want to do is I want to only promote open podcast content. So if a member of the open podcast community writes an article, then I want to be able to promote it on the in the newsletter. And then I want to promote maybe like a discussion that the open podcast community had on the forum, and that way people in like subscribe to the email list, they can see the interesting conversations that we have on the forum, and they would join the forum theoretically. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to the email list, the email list in the show notes. It's in there. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Bye. Oh, also, if you are thinking about starting a podcast, but you are nervous to start one, you can come join the Telegram chat and talk with me. Right now, I am starting a open podcast, community podcast, which will be members of the community hosting a episode for themselves, and this will allow community members who don't have a podcast right now, they're able to get the experience of hosting a podcast without all the hassle of setting it up. So they don't have to find a host. They don't have to promote the episode at all. I will do that for them. What else? They don't have to post their podcasts everywhere. I've done all that. All anyone has to do is send me the audio and send me the show notes, what they want in it, and they're done. They get the experience, and people will find out about them. They would gain Twitter followers, maybe a link, or they will get subscribers to their platforms. So yeah, if you want to do that, come join the Telegram chat in the show notes and talk to me about it. We can set something up. Right now, the podcast is unreleased. I'm waiting till maybe 2 to 3 people start or create an episode for it, and then it'll be released. I'm trying to make it a monthly thing. Okay. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Bye.